Greetings, curious minds. Welcome to Paranormal M, your gateway to stories that challenge the limits of understanding. Hit that subscribe button and enable notifications to embark on this mysterious journey with us. Enjoy the wonder. A spirit guiding another spirit. Question. Shortly after my aunt passed away, she came to visit me. We weren't all too close. Only towards her death, she expressed to me that she wished that she had gotten to know me better. Cancer, she knew she was going. And I could feel she really meant that. She came into the room from a very white, bright light. Took up the entire wall. It looked endless in all directions. She sat down in a chair next to me and held my hand. Without moving her lips, she spoke to me. She says, "Hello, how are you? So nice to see you. You're beautiful. I know about the pain in your heart. Please, heal your heart." I could respond to her in the same way. She was smiling. She didn't look sick at all. She also said that she was sorry. I knew what she meant by that. Her daughter and her granddaughters were very cruel to me growing up, and they said hurtful and untruthful things about me to her. She squeezed my hand and said, "I love you. It's time for me to go." When she had first entered the room, she was led in by a man over 6 feet tall, wearing what looked like a long white robe. He had dark black hair and a short-length dark facial hair. Only for one split second when I saw him, I wondered who he was. Towards the end of our conversation, I remember trying to think who he was. Then I knew I didn't know him. When she told me she had to go, it was like he was telling her it was time to go. She stood up. He held out his hand. They held hands and walked away together into the light. The light was there the entire conversation. So was he. A blessing to see my aunt, of course. To be allowed this. I know why she came to me this way. I think he was an angel. Maybe he was her angel. With most instances like this, it's all up to interpretation, person to person. If he was an angel, I think I know which angel it was. Does anyone have an idea who this man could be? I believe a ghost cat is in my house. So my family moved to this house about 3 or 4 years ago. The first time I was there after coming back from school, I kept hearing these meows. I only ever hear these meows when I'm at my parents' house. I remember the first time I heard it. It was really high-pitched and didn't sound like my cat's. It's almost like a piercing meow, echoing. It's hard to explain, but it just didn't sound right. I was upstairs in my bedroom and I went downstairs where my mom was sitting on the couch with our 2 cats. I asked her if she heard that sound. She looked confused. She hadn't heard anything, in fact. Then I asked if the cats had just been meowing. My mom said no, and they weren't. They were cuddled up and asleep on the couch. Sometimes the meows sounded like they were in the same room as me, and sometimes it sounded like it was coming from upstairs or somewhere else. Sometimes it sounded so near and loud that it freaked me out. Sometimes my cats react, sometimes they don't. I often hear the meows coming from upstairs. And my cats do like to stand and stare at and paw at the door to the attic. But what cemented this to me was there was a ghost cat in the house was that one night I left my door cracked for the cats and I got in bed. I closed my eyes and I lay there. And then I feel a cat hop on my bed. You know that feeling. You can feel their weight walking and then settle at the end of the bed. My cats liked the spot by the window. I don't think of it at the time, but my door was only cracked slightly so that my cats could push it open to get through. I didn't hear it squeak open, nor was it opened any wider than when I closed it. Anyway, with my eyes half closed, I reached down to where I felt the movement to give my cat a pet and a scratch. Except my hand lands on nothing. I open my eyes fully, then I look at the end of my bed, feeling around. Nothing, no one. I was so beyond confused. I had felt a cat there. I really had. So I lay back down and I try to go to sleep. Except I feel movement again. My heart totally jumped up and I shot straight up and grabbed my glasses from my bedside table. I turn on my lamp and there's no one there. I went downstairs and the cats were all in fact downstairs. Anyway, after that, still freaked out, I spoke out into the world, hoping the cat's spirit would understand. I don't like when you do that. You're welcome to hang around here, but it makes me uncomfortable when you do that. It didn't happen again, though, but I still often hear those strange echoing meows. I've been beginning to see flashes of a black cat around my ankles. I only ever experienced this too at my parents' house. I don't know if it's my eyes playing tricks on me, but sometimes I swear I look down and I see this random black cat near my feet, usually walking. Then as soon as I notice the apparition, it's gone. My shadow turned into something else. This happened in 2012. I was going to a trade school full-time, and my child was a toddler at that time. I lived with my mother, so it was just us three. We stayed in a duplex. The layout was weird. The 2-car garage was in front of the front door, and the house was towards the back. The garage and house weren't attached. There was a space between the house and the garage. In that space, you could access my bedroom through a sliding door, which was technically my window. Then, next to my window and door, was my mother's room. She had a basic window. The door to access the garage was facing my bedroom window. That being said, it had a porch light that brightened up that space. However, due to a stalker of mine, long story, that light was busted, and my front door light was busted too. It took a while for them to be fixed. Wasn't really a priority for my landlord, otherwise known as my uncle. Now let's get to the story. One day I stayed pretty late after class to make up a few assignments. By the time I left, it was dark outside. I'd say around 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. I pulled into my driveway and noticed my mother's car wasn't there. I usually call her if it's dark outside and ask if she could open the door for me so I wouldn't be scared walking up to the door. That night, it was pitch black. And, well, I'm a pussy. I sucked it up and started walking to my door. I'm struggling to get the key in the lock because it's dark and my phone is deep in my purse. Finally, I turn the key and push the door open. My right foot enters first. Left foot is still on the porch. My right hand is feeling for the light switch so I can bring my entire body inside. This happened all too fast, but felt like forever. As I'm still struggling to find the light switch, I can see my shadow on the curtains in the living room. The street light behind me is shining into my house lightly. I'm freaking out and I'm intensely focused on my shadow when my heart sinks into my asshole. In that second, I see my shadow lift off of the curtain and take an actual form. It was still a dark, shadowy looking thing, but it wasn't 2D anymore. It looked like someone was now standing in front of the curtain, very still. I realized I already flipped the switch, but no lights came on. I don't know why I kept flicking them up and down. I was panicking. My brain told me I should move my body, and if that figure moves with me, it's just my shadow and my fearful imagination. I moved, but that motherfucker did not. I quickly said, "Fuck," slammed the door and ran back to my car, making a weird noise out loud. As soon as I got in my car, I started crying uncontrollably. I immediately called my best friend, trying to frantically explain what I just witnessed. She was shocked and told me to come straight to her house. She stayed on the phone with me until I pulled into her driveway. She calmed me down and told me to call my mother. I called and told her to come to my friend's house first, and we'd follow her to my house. She arrived after 30 minutes or so. Once we got back to my house, my mother pulled out her holy water and she opened the front door. She switched the light on and it worked. I yelled, "I swear it wouldn't turn on earlier." She said a prayer, and we followed along. When I entered my house, I didn't feel that horrid feeling I had felt just an hour before. It was so strange. My mom called a priest that we know personally. He came by a couple days later and blessed our entire home. Haven't had any issues there ever since. The first time I saw something. Back in 2012, I was going to school for a certain trade. My parents and child were out for that evening, and I stayed late at school to finish up some missing hours. We used to live in a duplex. The 2-car garage was detached and was in the front. The actual house was in the back. When you're walking to the front door, there's a big gap in between the house and the garage. It's a grassy area. My bedroom window was a sliding glass door. You know, the ones that are usually used for apartment balconies. Yeah, anyway, in this gap between my window and the garage had a porch light. Porch in air quotes. Hope this gives you an idea of what it looks like. I had a crazy psycho ex that terrorized me and my family, which is a whole different story for another time in a different sub. But this is relevant. Months earlier, he busted the garage light and he busted our front porch light to the house. He wanted it pitch black outside at night so we couldn't see that he was there or who was trying to break in. Back to the summer evening in 2012. I came home and parked in the driveway. My parents' car wasn't there, so I figured that they were out getting ice cream with my child or something. I grab my phone and I start walking up to my house. I'm scared of the dark, so I have my phone light on to see where I'm going. As I put the key in, I notice the street light shining on my door. It gave me a tiny bit of comfort knowing that it wasn't extremely pitch black. As the door unlocks, I push the door open and put my right foot inside with my left foot still on the welcome mat. I'm feeling for the light switch to turn on the light in the entryway. My house was completely dark, so I didn't want to step inside until there was a lot of light. As I'm doing this, I notice the street light shining in and I see the shadow on the living room curtains. I'm starting to panic because I'm flicking the light switch, but it's not turning on. It's only been 30 to 40 seconds max, and I'm feeling like 20 minutes have gone by. In that moment, I had this sudden burning urge to move my head and body to see if my shadow would move with me. I don't know why, I just needed validation that it was my own shadow. I'm swaying my head side to side in the most exaggerated way, and what the fuck do you know, it doesn't fucking move. Once I noticed it, that it wasn't moving with my motions, I saw this quote-unquote shadow go from a two-dimensional thing on my curtain to a four-dimensional body. It's like it lifted off the curtain, coming forward very slowly, and became a body of a person, a silhouette of a person, but it was black. The hairs on the back of my neck jumped the fuck off my body. I yelled a short, "Fuck no," then slammed the door and ran back to my car screaming like a bitch. Kinda just like I saw a big roach and scurried away. I was horrified. As soon as I got into the car, I bursted out in tears. I had this overwhelming feeling of fear. I called my best friend at the time, crying hysterically. She believed me instantly and told me to come over. As soon as I got there, I told her exactly how I'm telling you. I finally called my parents and told them what happened. They agreed to meet me at my friend's house, and they followed me back to the home, but this time with my friend in the car with me. My mom walks in first with her holy water ready. I'm right behind her. She opens the door, and lo and behold, the light turns on normally, nothing out of place. The eerie feeling is gone too. My mom blessed the house anyways. I asked my parents to get our priest to come bless the entire house. I haven't had anything bad happen after that, and I'll never forget the feeling that I had seen my shadow not moving with me. It gives me a nasty feeling. Obviously, this is a retelling of the last story, but from a different subreddit, and with a slightly different recollection, so I thought I'd put it in here as well. On to the next story. My child saw me, but knew it wasn't me. Don't want to add a bunch of irrelevant stuff, but I want to give you all an idea of why things are the way they are. Our child is about to be 11. Our central air has been broken for a year now, so we have 2 window units. One big unit in the living room, and 1 unit upstairs in me and my husband's bedroom. My child doesn't sleep in their own room because unfortunately it's the hottest room in the house without AC. Haven't installed a unit in my child's room because their window opens sideways, and most units only fit windows that open up and down, which is only in my bedroom. With all that being said, on really hot evenings, we usually sleep downstairs because it's cooler, but now that school's back, I let my child sleep in our bed. Husband sleeps on the couch because he works nights. Easier to just plop down. And I sleep upstairs with my child because I'm pregnant and obviously need AC. The sleep setting in my bedroom. No night lights in the room at all. Just a tad bit of the echo show illuminating the room. Barely. You could literally still trip, stub your pinky toe, and fall to your death because it's pretty damn dark. This particular night, though, husband and I stayed downstairs watching movies and spending time. Our child is sound asleep upstairs in her bedroom. We are horrible night owls. It's 5 a.m. already and we're watching Halloween, the 2018 one, on the couch. 6 a.m. comes around and the alarm goes off to wake our child for school. Finally, our kiddo comes downstairs, and this is when we're told of the experience. I'll put it in quotes to have it come from their perspective. "Mommy, I saw you in the room last night." "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, you were standing in the bedroom door, slumped over a bit with your legs apart and staring at me with a weird, freaky smile." I'm genuinely confused, but interested. It scared me so bad, but I thought you were just messing with me, like trying to scare me. So I said, Mommy, okay, you can stop, you're freaking me out, but you kept looking at me with that creepy smile and you never moved. Did I or it say anything? No. And it's weird because I knew it wasn't you, but I didn't want to move. I wanted to get up and turn on the light. I didn't want to look away and it charge at me or something. I look at my husband and I say, I've read so many stories about this happening to people that I definitely believe it. Was this right now when you woke up or what? Oh no, it was around 1 a.m. because I saw the time on the Echo, and I thought it was 7 a.m. and that's when I saw it. You. It felt like it stared at me for 10 minutes if I could guess. And then all of a sudden it disappeared into thin air. But in a weird way, like black mist floating away right in front of me. Right before it dissolved, I made the sign of a cross and prayed for it to go away. Then it did. I was so scared. I didn't feel like it wanted to kill me or anything, but I was definitely scared. My mom and her ghosts. So a bit of background first. My mom and her family are from Indonesia, specifically a city called Bandung. Her father and mother weren't poor, but weren't terribly wealthy either. She and her sister grew up there in the 1960s to late 70s. They had a house in the mountains that they would go to during holiday breaks. The house wasn't new, possibly around 10 years old at the time that this particular incident happened, and had about a 1-acre big backyard. The yard had a few trees and an old covered well that my mom and sister liked to play around. The well was supposedly much older than the house itself, but no one knew how old. At this time, my grandmother told me that my mom was probably around 3 to 4 years old and her sister about 6 or 7. My grandma, who loves gardening, was out in the backyard planting some flowers and watching the girls chase each other around. She eventually went inside for a drink, with her elder daughter following her in. She asked her eldest, my aunt, about her younger sister. My grandmother, aunt, mom, I'm just going to say that, okay, the story is saying that GM stands for grandmother, A stands for aunt, and M stands for mom, so I will read them as such. Grandmother. Where's your younger sister? Aunt. Oh, she's out there playing with her friends. Grandmother. Friends? What friends? My grandmother was confused because there were no neighbors nearby, and the closest house wasn't for miles. She walked back outside to investigate. Near the old well, she saw her younger daughter, my mom, running around in circles, seemingly chasing something and laughing. My grandma was very sensitive to spiritual things, so what she saw next, she told me, was unforgettable. She walked closer to get a better look, and she saw 4 figures beside her daughter, all laughing and running around with her. One figure in particular really stood out. She said it was a young boy dressed in suspenders and a hat, but his face was slightly obscured, like something had rubbed it out. The other 3 figures seemed to be much smaller and harder to see than he was. She told me later that she had a bad feeling about them, so she called my mom back inside. Once inside, she asked my mom who she had been playing with. My mom insisted that they were her friends. The next day, my grandma and grandpa kept a close watch on the 2 girls as they went out to play in the yard. My grandma had asked the maid about the previous tenants who stayed on the property that afternoon, and the maid said that was 30 years before there was a family, and they had a young boy. The boy died after falling into this well. My grandma had been told before that they bought the house that the well was filled and covered, and it should be bolted into place. She had a very bad feeling when she saw my mom peel away from my sister toward the well. She grabbed her daughter and ran to the well, calling her husband after her. My grandpa grabbed the cover, and sure enough, it hadn't been bolted down, and the well was still hollow. My grandma called a service the next day to fill the well and secure the cover so that it couldn't be moved. When she told me that my mom was sad after that, she couldn't see her friends anymore. However, to this day, my mom and her sister both believed that they had been interacting with ghosts, and even my grandmother said the same until her death. My mom had a special proclivity towards the supernatural. A new house has its own surprises. It was 1999, and my brother was about to turn 1 year old. I was 6 at the time, and my mom was looking for a new house to move into since her family was growing. Her parents were moving in with us to take care of my brother, who was very sickly, and our current house was too small for everybody. My mom went to go meet with the realtor and see a house while my dad was at work and I was at school. Brother was at daycare. The realtor took her to a beautiful stone and brick house in a pretty nice neighborhood. It had a big backyard with a beautiful landscape and lovely wooden and carpeted floors. It was a truly gorgeous house, but something about that house made my mom uneasy. She couldn't tell why, but being in the house felt like someone was watching her. She said that she got chills when she came upstairs to the bedroom. The realtor proudly showed her to a girl's bedroom decorated in lavender with a floor-length mirror on the closet door. My mom said that the moment that she saw that mirror, she froze on the spot. She called the realtor back. "Mom, I think I'm done here." Realtor, visibly confused. "Really? I thought you'd like this one. It's beautiful." My mom, "I'd like to leave. I really don't think I want this house." Realtor, "May I ask what turned you off to this house?" Mother, Has anyone died here?" The realtor shuffled through her notes on the history of the house. "No. At least I wasn't informed of anything like that happening here." Mom, "I think someone has committed suicide in this room. I can see someone in that mirror." Realtor, looking at the mirror, "I don't see anyone, but if it makes you feel better, we can move on to another house." My mom agreed and left the house. She described to me when I was much older that the figure she saw in the mirror was that of a teenage girl wearing a nightgown. She had tied herself up to the ceiling fan with a sheet. The realtor apparently got back to her the next week and told her that she did some digging about the family who lived there before. The house was a foreclosure, so it wasn't that easy to find them. The girl my mother saw was 14 years old when she killed herself. Apparently, her father gambled away their money and the bank seized their house shortly after she died. Needless to say, we did not move into that house, and my mom was never liking floor-length mirrors since. Dennis the Menace. This happened to me and my 3 roommates about 4 to 5 years back when we were in college. My roommates and I lived on a campus in a brand new building that was just opened less than a year ago at the time of the story. Our apartment was a suite containing 2 bedrooms with 2 beds and 2 bathrooms connected by a kitchen and a living area in the middle. I moved into the apartment in the middle of the spring semester after a falling out with the previous roommate in another building. Shortly after I moved in, my new roommate sat with me in the living area and told me about a poltergeist that they had dubbed Dennis. Dennis moved things remotely, but had never at that point caused serious harm. Thought it was a little scary at first, but incredibly I found myself getting used to it. Occasionally I'd see something small, like a cup sliding across the counter or a bottle of ketchup tipping over, or even a chair sliding out from underneath the table. But there wasn't anything too major. That is, until the end of the second semester, when it seemed Dennis was becoming more and more active, and that it was targeting one of my roommates. One evening close to finals week, I came home to my roommate, C, from here on. C was pale and shivering next to the stove. "Dennis just tried to kill me." It was rather short, so she often needed help to get things from high shelves and cupboards in the kitchen. Whenever I was around, I'd help her because I'm pretty tall and I understand the plight of the vertically challenged, but she was alone this time. "See, I tried to get some sauce," pointing at the cupboard above the stove. "So I grabbed a chair to climb, and then suddenly I felt the chair move underneath my feet." She spoke quickly and breathlessly, so I moved her to a seated position on the chair and tried to calm her down. Me: "How did it move? Did it feel like it slipped or something?" "No, it felt like it was being pushed. It moved way faster than if I had slipped. I was lucky enough to jump down before it started moving too fast." I encouraged her to lay down on the couch until the other roommates were done with classes. She relayed the same story to them when they came home. We decided to simply watch out and text each other immediately after another incident happened. I moved out after that last semester due to my participation in my school's program, but kept in touch with the other roommates. I ended up still living in the same building but on a different floor. When we came back for the new school year, I met up with her for lunch at the school's common area. We were sitting and waiting for our food when she told me the latest update in the Dennis saga. This is her. "I was the first one back before the semester started. I was moving my stuff in, and I'd gotten some holy water that my mom gave me from the church." Her mom was a super religious person. "I put the water in a cup on the coffee table, and I was moving my stuff back into my bedroom when it happened. There was a loud noise like something was shaking. It was so strange because I couldn't feel it in my room. But when I came to the living room, it looked like an earthquake was happening. I grabbed as many electronics and fragile items as I could and stuffed them into my bedroom." Me: "Did it stop?" Her: "No, not until I said the prayer that the priest told me to say. I think that bringing the holy water really upset Dennis." We all wondered who or what was haunting this apartment, and why. There were two prevailing theories. One was before the building was erected, there were a series of old auction houses that were selling slaves during the Civil War era. We suspected that the poltergeist might have been a result of a spirit of a slave, but there wasn't much credence behind this theory. The second theory was one that I personally believed due to the fact that plenty of other school buildings around us were haunted in the same way. My school consisted of two campuses, the medical school campus and the general education campus. However, the medical school campus was much older than the general campus and used to be surrounded by hospitals run by the university. Less than 1 block away from where my apartment now stands was an old mental institution. That building was turned into housing for the honors college students. One of my friends who lived there described a similar, although slightly more intense haunting as the one that happened to my roommates and me. We learned later that most of the buildings on the block were used as part of the mental institution itself. Things seemed to calm down after that incident, and she kept the holy water around just in case. We never knew for sure what happened to Dennis, but he really was a menace. Insane. If you listened to my Dennis the Menace story, then you know that I used to live with a poltergeist dubbed Dennis. Well, this is about a friend of mine and a response to my story. My friend Kay, from here on, lived in the Honors College half of about a block away from my building. The Honors College was a repurposed building that used to be part of a hospital that surrounded my university. Kay told me that the Honors College was a much more traditional college dorm-style building than my building, and that students lived in rooms rather than suites, consisting of a single bed, and the bathrooms and other facilities were communal. They all shared a laundry room that was located in the basement level of that building. The Honors College was part of the hospital wing that contained mentally ill patients, and this fact was reinforced by the presence of small rooms sealed shut by heavy steel doors that were painted the same cold shade of white as the rest of the hall. The rooms were mostly located in the basement, the first levels of the building. Most of the doors were cemented shut and heavily painted over, as if the building were trying to ignore its past. Kay told me that on full moon nights, she tried to find other places outside of the building to sleep, because as she lived alone in her room on the first floor, she could hear screaming, banging, and scratching echoing from down the hall. One night close to midterms, she was taking her laundry down to the basement. While she was down there, she could hear a faint sound over the rumble of the washing machine. It sounded like a voice calling for someone. Curiosity was getting the better of her. She stopped the machine early and listened to make sure the voice wasn't calling for her. Well, it wasn't, but it was saying something else. "Let me out, I'm not crazy!" Over and over reverberated over the halls. It got louder and louder and was accompanied by the sound of items crashing on the ground. The walls felt like they were shaking, and then came a cacophony of other voices that seemed to come from the sealed rooms. She nearly crapped her pants. She abandoned her wet clothes and sped out of the building. She showed up in the lobby of my apartment and asked if she could stay with me and my roommate. I was surprised because she looked like something was chasing her. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to get her to calm down. "You know how you said you had a ghost in your old apartment?" she asked, still heaving. I had already moved out by then. "Yeah," I said. "Well, have I got a story for you." A nighttime ride. My grandmother told me this story when I was around 12 or 13 years old. She was always very sensitive to paranormal things, so she had tons of stories. Now for some background. If you haven't seen my previous stories, my mom's parents and my mom are all Indonesian. My grandparents immigrated to the States after my brother was born to help take care of him when he was a baby. As I got older, my grandma noticed that I liked ghost stories, so she often told me ones that happened to her. This one happened when she and my grandpa were a young, newly married couple. It was nighttime, and my grandparents were riding home from their jobs at the pharmacy on a motorcycle. The road, for the most part, was pretty deserted and quiet, which made for a nice ride home. They were about halfway back when my grandma suddenly told my grandpa, who was driving, to stop. "What? What is it?" He had screeched to a near stop at a streetlight that was on the side of the road. My grandma was pale and staring straight ahead. She finally worked up the courage to say something. "Grandmother, do you need some help?" My grandpa confused, was looking all around to see who might she be talking to, but he couldn't see anyone. "Who are you talking to?" "What, you don't see her?" "See who?" "The woman there. She's holding a baby and the baby's crying. I think they're bleeding. We need to do something." "What are you talking about? There's no woman and there's no baby. You're just tired. We need to go home." He started up the motorcycle again and began to speed away, but my grandma kept looking behind her at the woman and child. My grandpa insisted that she was seeing things due to her exhaustion from work, but she was convinced otherwise. My grandparents found out later that the woman and child were victims of a hit and run on the same street where she saw them. And at my grandmother's pleading, the two of them went later to place flowers at that site. A Visitor in the Night. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I played the piano, and I was a regular on the concert circuit in my hometown. I had recitals about twice a year, and it was close to the time of my Christmas recital concert in late December. My grandpa was very ill in the hospital. It was found that he had colon cancer a few days before, and he was in treatment. We didn't know how advanced the cancer had been at the time. I came with my whole family, mom, dad, younger sister, grandma, and brother, to visit him in the hospital. But I won't talk too much about the visit here, since it's still painful to talk about. We went home that evening, feeling pretty good about everything and optimistic that my grandpa would get better and come home. But something happened that night. It was 3 a.m. and the doorbell rang, along with a knocking sound at the door. My dad went downstairs to see who the heck would visit at 3 in the morning. I don't remember much being a sleep-deprived preteen, but my mom described to me what happened after I was fully awake. My dad looked around the front porch to see who might have rung the bell, and after being unsuccessful, he closed the door and bolted it, complaining about ding-dong ditchers. My mom said that she saw the apparition of her father ascend the stairs and enter his room at the top of the stairs. My grandma, who had been asleep, also said that she could see him enter their bedroom, and later my parents' room. My mom was acting very strangely for the rest of that day. For context, my mom is usually pretty lax about most things. She prefers doing things like sewing and reading and knitting to sitting around and watching television. Her father, however, was a very severe person who always enjoyed working with his hands, repairing things and tinkering with electronics. But his favorite thing to do was watching action shows like Walker, Texas Ranger or MacGyver, which my mom usually disliked. That day, my mom was sitting around watching my grandpa's favorite shows and talking to her mom in a strange manner. They usually used Bahasa Indonesian to talk to each other. My grandma told me that she was asking her things that she would have no idea about, or things that only she and my grandpa talked about. My grandma, concerned, asked if my mom was feeling okay. But all my mom could say was she felt as if her brain was not her own. My dad even suggested that she go to bed early when she complained of a massive headache later that evening. She said she had a very strange dream as if her father was leaving her, and she couldn't sleep any longer. She tried to call the hospital as soon as she woke up. She found out that her father was dead. It was only a few days till Christmas, and since then she could never celebrate Christmas the same way ever again. a shadow of himself. It was the late 90s, probably 96 or 97, and I was 4 years old. My uncle on my dad's side was ill, and he came to live with my family because we lived closer to the hospital. Now, my uncle was chronically ill since he was a child, so his being sick wasn't anything new. He stayed in the room adjacent to my parents and across the hall from my room. My uncle spoiled me whenever he could. He couldn't have children of his own, so he took whatever chance there was to spend time with me. Before his illness got worse, he and his then wife used to watch over me at their house while my parents worked. He was cheerful and vibrant, even amidst his kidney disease. So much so that my dad used to joke that he was the more attractive brother. But back then, in about 1996, he was slowly wasting away. He used to watch television in the living room until my mom came home, but after a while he could barely get out of bed. Eventually, he passed in 1997 of kidney cancer. Shortly after the funeral, my mom recalled coming home from work after picking me up from preschool. She saw the garage door was open, but no cars were in the garage. She assumed maybe my dad was home, or maybe he forgot to close it. But no. She walked inside the house, leaving me outside with the car running just in case someone was inside. But not before alerting our next-door neighbor to watch me. What she saw next was shocking. In the living room, the television was on and flipping through channels, as if someone was finding something to watch. The previously locked guest bedroom that my uncle was staying in was wide open, as was my bedroom door. She then saw what appeared to be my uncle sitting on the couch in the living room. "What are you doing here?" she asked the apparition cautiously. The figure turned around, and for a split second she could see my uncle, his face twisted into a shocked and puzzled expression that mirrored her own. But shortly after, he vanished. My mom hurried back out of the house to where I was with the neighbor. She thanked her and stuffed me back into my seat, drove me to my cousin's house who lived nearby, and called my dad. "I just saw your brother," she said breathlessly when he answered. "I was told that my parents and grandparents ordered a priest to come to our house to exorcise a spirit that Sunday, while I stayed with my cousin and his wife. The priest told my mom that since the spirit was of my uncle, a normally mild-mannered and kind man, that the spirit wasn't malevolent. I don't remember much of what happened after that, but I do have a small memory of him coming back to visit me in my dreams." The Chained. This happened quite a few years back in the pre-Katrina New Orleans. My family and I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and for a few summers we made regular trips to New Orleans. The food, the culture, the music, and vibrancy of the people were very attractive to my parents, and they wanted to show that to us kids. My brother, sister, and I loved going there for the few summers leading up to Katrina. I was only around middle school age, probably 11 years old, and my brother was 6 and my sister was 4. This incident happened during our many outings to the French Quarter. I remembered reading a pamphlet about haunted tours in New Orleans, of the old French-style crypts and cemeteries in the area. The stories of voodoo queens and vampires and black magic fascinated me. These things were running through my head as we walked along the road leading up to Bourbon Street, with my brother following me closely. My brother was and is a reserved kid. He never really let it be known when he was bothered and tended to bottle up his emotions until he exploded, even when he was a child. So his sudden grabbing of my hand as we made it to the intersection was slightly shocking to say the least. "What's wrong?" I said, looking at him with concern. He was pale and shaking like a leaf, his big round eyes focused straight ahead. "I heard someone," he said. Normally, hearing someone in the middle of a busy city like New Orleans would be nothing of concern, but at this time, the street was misty, quiet, and still. There was no one as far as anyone could see, save for the tiny Pomeranians that were yapping at the window in the nearby townhouse. I looked across the street at the sprawling, ancient-looking cemetery with its cold, white mausoleum and grim-looking angels that presided over the dead. "What do you think it was?" I asked. "I heard something heavy, like chains were being dragged, and I heard a voice that sounded like an old man. He was saying something, but I don't know. Next thing I knew, I saw a bony white hand reaching over my shoulder. I felt like if I looked back at whoever or whatever that was, that they'd get me," he said in a strangled voice. He squeezed my hand so tightly that my fingers felt like they would lose circulation. "Don't worry, you'll be okay." I honestly had no idea what else I could say to him besides that. I ushered him to walk ahead of me as I pulled my mom back to explain to her what happened. She didn't say anything to my dad or my sister, and instead took my brother and positioned him at the front. My brother was quiet for the rest of the day, his face pale, and his lips were drawn tight. My best guess as to what he heard or saw would be one of those ghosts who haunted the quarter, but as to the specter's identity, I had no idea. The painting. When I was 5 years old, my family and I moved into a new house. My dad wanted to buy some paintings to decorate our new home. There was one painting that he bought at an antique shop that hung just over the stairs. It was of a girl with dark curls dressed in linen robes. She was standing against what appeared to be a metal door, holding a spear in both hands behind her back. Her brow was low and heavy, and her feet bare, and her posture was stiff. Immediately, I sensed a weird air about this painting. About a month after the painting was hung above the stairs, I saw something cross her face, like a shadow. Her normally expressionless visage was now smirking. An evil-looking half-grin appeared across her lips. And maybe it was just me, but I swore I saw her hands tighten on the spear behind her back. Frightened, I ran as quickly as I could up the stairs into my bedroom, where I hid underneath the covers for almost an hour. A little while later, I peeked out from behind my bedroom door at the painting at the end of the hall, making sure that she was still smiling. This time I saw her dark eyes meet mine. I yelped and slammed the door shut and didn't come out for the rest of the day. That night, I dreamt about her. The dream was so vivid and real that I remember it to this day. In my dream, I saw the painting, but this time she was gone. All that was visible beyond the frame was the bronze-colored door that was behind her. I could distinctly smell the sort of acrid scent of paint thinner, though I had no idea what that smell was at the time, only that it was sour, acidic, that kind of scent. I looked all around for my parents, my grandparents, anybody at all. I ran into my grandparents' room where my brother's crib was. No one was there. I couldn't find my parents either. I was alone. When I left my parents' room, there she was, standing in front of my bedroom door, spear pointed in front of her, her dark face twisted into an expression of rage. When she turned toward me as she ran at full speed down the hall, her spear flew through the air and lodged itself into the wooden door of my parents' bedroom. Terrified, I ducked underneath her legs and ran as fast as I could outside, and though my terror, I just heard her scream something and I woke up. The next morning after my nightmare, I decided I'd tell my dad that I didn't like that painting. Fortunately, he didn't take me seriously. My dad had an odd fascination with the girl in the painting. My mom even admitted later that she didn't like her either, that she had an evil air about her. But no matter how much she tried to convince him to get rid of it, he refused. My dad would make comments like, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" And no matter where we moved, he always took her with him. For years after, he'd call me crazy for not seeing her beauty, or paranoid for thinking a painting was evil. But I held fast to my belief. The last time I saw her was in my parents' attic. She was much smaller than I remembered. Her expression as dark as ever, but her face looked different than before. She now wears a poker face, her eyes unreadable, and her mouth is in a tight straight line. The evil air about her is diminished, but is still very much there. I turned her painting around so she'd face lying down as I left the attic. The Ghost in the Room. When I was 6 years old, my dad's father passed from cancer. It was one of the first major experiences with death, and to be honest, I don't think I fully grasped what death even meant. But I did understand that my grandpa wouldn't be coming back. I remember going to my grandparents' house with my grandma, my parents, and my aunt and uncle. We went back to stay with my grandma to eat dinner and make sure that she was going to be all right. Now for some background information. My grandma's house was an old-built one in the 1940s. There was a small yellow-tiled kitchen toward the front that led out to the garage park where my grandpa's old Ford truck was parked. To the left of the kitchen was what she referred to as the sitting room, where people did just that. Sit and talk. Straight back from the kitchen was the bathroom and the bedrooms. Her room was on the right side, and the two other bedrooms were adjacent to hers. Those were my dad, his brother, and sister's rooms. I sat on one of the rusty orange vinyl chairs with my parents and aunt, listening to them talk. My mom was holding my infant brother who was asleep in her arms, and my aunt was cooing over him. I got so bored of it all that I slid out my chair and slinked off to the bedrooms to find my grandma. I saw her sitting in her room, staring blankly at the floor, looking lost. She had suffered the loss of her son a few years before, and now her husband, both to cancer. My grandma was a vibrant, cheery, and vivacious woman. Everyone knew her to be very gregarious and charitable. She was the type of person who'd give the clothes off of her own back if somebody needed them. But those who needed the most help often asked for none of it themselves. I tried to get her attention, not sure of what to do or why she was acting that way. I was only 6 after all. But I don't clearly remember exactly what happened next. All I do remember was that eventually I left the room. I wandered down the hall to my dad and my brother's old room, the same room I had used to sleep when I came over. And what I saw next was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I opened the door to the room and I saw the image of my grandpa, his tall form bowed over and his fingers laced together in prayer. For some strange reason, the apparition was in black and white. I couldn't see the rest of his body. Just his upper body was visible. The rest was hidden in shadow. His image seemed to grow until I could feel it engulf me. I closed my eyes and turned away, but when I turned back, it was gone. Utterly shell-shocked, I ran back to my grandma, who caught me as I fled the room. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked soothingly. I saw, and I couldn't get it out. "What did you see?" she asked. "I saw Granddaddy." She looked behind me but didn't see anything. I think she didn't understand what I meant because she'd begun to explain that I couldn't have seen him. But I was adamant. She told me eventually not to tell my dad or aunt, because she thought the news would upset them even more. And I never did, until now. For some reason, I forgot this even happening to me, until I wrote the last story about my mom's father's spirit possessing her. I think I must have buried it deep down because as soon as it crossed my mind, everything came flooding back. I could even recall the musty smell of my dad's childhood bedroom. The only thing that wasn't clear was how I got to that point. I think I must have hugged my grandma and then left her in her room, or maybe I just left without doing anything. What can I say? I was a child. Now that I remember what happened, I also remember thinking that the apparition looked like a character in an old black and white film, flickering in shades of gray. I remember clearly thinking that he looked like someone had stepped out of an old set in the living room. I think this was also my first real experience with a ghost. Most of the ones I've written so far were told to me by my mom and grandmother, my mom's mother. Eventually, my cousin told me that they had to have the pastor from the church to go and check out the house. What I said to my grandma must have really rattled her to her core. She didn't want to live there anymore and eventually moved in with my aunt who lived nearby. She was never the same after that, and never could talk about it to anyone else. So, I will never know. Ghost City. I'm not sure if this is allowed here because it's a place that's seen a lot of paranormal activity rather than a single occurrence. In fact, it is deeply rooted in the ancient religion as a result of its perceived connection with the afterlife. I lived in Chongqing, China, up until about a year or 2 years ago. One of my closest friends was from a town known as Fengdu, which was located in Chongqing province in south-central China. She told me that Fengdu was also known as Ghost City throughout mainland China, because it was believed to be the entrance to the afterlife. She told me that the name Ghost City was ascribed to Fengdu in the Eastern Han Dynasty several thousand years ago, when 2 imperial officials came to Ming Mountain, central to Fengdu, to practice Taoist teachings. Their surnames Yin and Wang combined meant King of Hell, and later a temple was erected in their honor, depicting life in the underworld. She told me that it's believed that the dead go to the afterlife through a series of 3 tests. The first test is to cross the quote-unquote nothing to be done bridge, which is a series of 3 stone arches under which square pools of water reside. The virtuous souls will be able to cross without any issue, while the villainous souls will fall into the pools. The second test is to face King Yama, aka the King of Hell in the afterlife, for judgment. At the temple, the passage is known as the Ghost Torturing Pass, and it's decorated with sculptures of ferocious demons and the horribly mutilated bodies of evil souls. The last test is known as the Tianzi Palace. Tianzi means child of heaven. The soul must stand upon a special stone using only 1 foot for 3 minutes. If the soul is righteous and pure, they may enter paradise without issue, but an evil soul will be struck down and sent immediately to hell. At the very end of the 3 passages, there is what's called Last Glance at Home. This is a tower where souls consigned to hell may say farewell to their living family. My friends told me that it can be somewhat gimmicky, but the place actually is believed to be populated by ghosts. Decorated throughout this 2,000-year-old temple are depictions of torture, where people are shown being hung upside down and beaten, black and blue. Coffins are hung from the sides of cliffs as part of an old tradition, and dismembered body parts are pictured in reliefs around the temple walls. Many of the locals also regularly report paranormal activity happening in and around the temple grounds. For example, it's not uncommon for one to see a dead loved one there, and poltergeists happen very often within the temple walls. The entire city really leans into the nickname of Ghost City, and it's most popular to visit during Halloween and King Ming Festival, which is a time where the spirits of loved ones are believed to return to the world of the living to see their families. Not much unlike the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Despite not having visited there myself, my friend told me that the people were visiting for the first time that Fengdu can have a haunted air about it. Giant statues of King Yama and the demons don't help much to alleviate the tension. She also added that the locals love to decorate the area with skeletons doing daily tasks such as cleaning, cooking, playing mahjong, etc., to make it seem more fun. However, one must keep in mind that most, if not all, of these ancient images of torture are depictions of real practices, however gruesome, and the locals firmly believe that the souls of the damned reside there in Fengdu, the entrance to the ancient Chinese hell. Monkeys and black magic. Not quite a ghost story, but I'm pretty sure this counts as something paranormal, and if not, it's still extremely creepy. When I was 17, my mom decided to take our entire family back to her home country in Indonesia to meet her extended family for the first time. Our itinerary would put us in Bali for 2 weeks out of the near 2-month stay at a luxury resort, plus a guided tour of the island. Sounds amazing, right? It was. However, my mom had a very stern warning to give all of us before we embarked on our journey. Some people there practice black magic, and whether you believe it or not, you do not want to end up with a curse on your head. The best ways to avoid it are, do not touch the monkeys that you see, and take care when discarding toiletries. This warning was reiterated by our guide when we arrived as he picked us up from the airport. He told us of what happened to a couple when they did not heed the warnings to not disturb the local fauna in Bali. The story comes from our guide who bore witness to some of these events. There was a young couple in their early mid-20s that came from Australia to Bali as part of their honeymoon. The man was a photographer, and he and his wife wanted to visit the Monkey Temple in Bali. The Monkey Temple was erected by the Hindu people of the region as a way to worship Hanuman, the Hindu monkey god. The monkeys in the surrounding jungle live there and roam freely throughout the temple. I warned them not to bother to visit the monkeys during their visit, he said pointedly. The woman and her husband were enjoying their time at the temple, taking pictures and seeing the dances performed by the worshippers, when the woman encountered a baby monkey. The monkey was alone, playing with a bottle that it had swiped from a tourist. She thought the monkey had been orphaned, so she picked it up and hid it in her coat. When the guide came back around to pick the couple back up, the baby monkey had fallen asleep inside her coat. The guide noticed something wasn't right with the woman, so he asked her about their visit to the temple and continued with pointed questions to try and confirm his suspicions, but stopped when he felt that he might be overstepping. I saw something move in her coat when I dropped them back at their hotel, but I didn't know what it was exactly. Something told me that it was definitely a monkey. The next day, the couple took the monkey with them and rented a car to drive to the mountains. However, they never made it back. They got into a horrible accident, leaving the car in flames. When authorities arrived on the scene, the only thing that could be recovered was the baby monkey, who was completely unharmed. That's the end of tonight's stories. I hope you guys had a good time listening, and I am more interested in this ancient Chinese city than I had been previously, so I want to find more stories like that. But that's just me being selfish. Anything having to do with undead cities is somewhat of an intrigue to me. As always, see you later and see you next time.